Welcome to Sailing Stories. I'm your host, Jerome Rand, and today we are getting into a tragic, worst nightmare scenario for me when it comes to being out at sea, and that is to have your boat sink and you end up in a life raft. So today we're going over the story of Seven Callahan. So back in the 1980s, precisely 1981, Seven Callahan, who had quite a bit of experience in boat building and sailing and all this sort of stuff, ended up building himself a 22-foot wooden sloop. So that's one mast, two sails, and nice hardy little vessel in hopes of crossing the Atlantic Ocean from the East Coast, from Maine, and he wanted to go over to France and join in a race that goes back from France to the Caribbean called the Mini Transat. And this is sort of the early days of that racing. A lot of guys will actually, or gals, will use that race as a stepping stone to start sailing and racing around the world on bigger boats. But this is the tiny sort of Grand Prix sort of stuff. And he took somebody with him on a couple of voyages to test it out. He did the 1-2 back to Bermuda and all that sort of stuff. And then he set sail and he makes it to France. Pretty uneventful trip. The boat does well. The boat's name is Solo. And he gets over to France and it's late in the year. Really, really ugly weather in the Bay of Biscay. And it's just looking like they're going to start this race in a gale. It's going to be pretty ugly. And they end up starting the race. About half of the fleet doesn't even make it. He ends up hitting something and doing some damage to the boat and then having to pull into Portugal and do repairs and kind of bum his way around down there. He ends up meeting some other people, and instead of sort of just jetting straight across to the Caribbean, he decides we'll go and do some cruising down the coast, see some places, kind of hit the mellow vibe. He's a sailor after all. And sometimes if things don't go according to plan, you just go where the breeze takes you. That's one of the really nice things about sailing, I think. And in any event, after a few weeks go by, and I think actually 2 months, he ends up back on the boat by himself, and he's down in the Canary Islands, and he decides, well, you know what? Still gonna sail out of here. I'm gonna go for Antigua, and that's pretty much a pretty common route. They almost describe it as like a milk run because you're pretty much in the trades. It's not really stormy conditions out there typically, and yeah, it should be a pretty uneventful trip compared, honestly, from going from Maine all the way across to France. Now that's a pretty risky trip. You get a lot of low pressure systems that come off of the East Coast and just blast their way across, building. You get caught in one of those and you're going to remember it for a long time. In any event, so he sets up and he's ready to go. And the first week or so of sailing by himself, it's fantastic. He's having a great time, sunsets, nice breezes, nothing crazy, but he is in an area where the winds can whip up pretty good. And they call them the Portuguese trades, or at least that's what I've heard before. And sometimes they can actually blow really good. And that's exactly what happens. So after about a week, the winds start to crank way up. Nothing he can't handle, waves 10 to 15 feet. Now on a 21-foot boat, that's a lot. That's pretty scary. You're looking up from just a few feet above the water. Those waves look tremendous, but Solo's doing great. Steven's doing great. It's a little rocky and rolly. He's a little annoyed by it, to tell you the truth, but in any event, it's sailing. Usually they come, they go, and then you get back to normal sailing. And one night, after about, I think it's 2 weeks on the boat, he goes down. It's still blowing pretty good out there. The waves are still breaking, but the boat, again, sailing itself away. And he lays down in his bunk, and just a few minutes later, bang, a huge crash, and then all of a sudden, water rushing in everywhere. He hops up. He can't even figure out where it's dark. The boat basically is filling with water faster than he can even figure out where it's coming from. Still doesn't really know, but he knows the ship is going down. So he goes up and he grabs his little life raft. Luckily, that's still there. It's in a big canister, throws it over the side of the boat. The life raft inflates, and it's right there. It's tied off, and he's got a couple little things that he throws in, and then he hops in the life raft. That's pretty much what you want to do because sometimes these boats can just fill with water, and sink in 15 seconds. And so you have to sort of be ready. Normally, the protocol is to tie off the lifeline or the life raft to the back of the boat and wait until it actually is really going under, because if that boat, sometimes they like to just sit right at the water line. They're almost submerged, but not really, because you always want to stay with that boat until the very last second. They have this sort of saying in the offshore world that you want to be stepping up into your life raft. And he was in that mindset, and he was prepared. His life raft was a 6-person, even though it was just for him, which actually led me to have a 6-person life raft on Sparrow when I did the trip around the world. So thank you to Steven. Tip the hat. I never had to use mine, though. In any event, so he's in there, and he's hanging off of this. He has one line tied off, and he's sort of hanging there, and debris and stuff is sort of coming off of the boat, and he's able to like pick it up and throw it in the life raft, because at that point, anything that comes off of that boat, you just grab it. You just grab it, and if you don't need it, you don't need it, but you never know down the line, because you don't know how long you're going to be in that situation. And he's just sort of thinking, okay, I got to get back on this boat because I got to go grab some more stuff. Grabs the emergency grab bag, and I think he got a little bit of water, maybe a couple bags of some food, stuff like that, not much. And he ends up hopping back into the life raft, and then all of a sudden he's sort of there, and he's sitting and he's waiting. And again, the boat still hasn't gone all the way down. And he's sort of looking at it, and he's plotting and planning out his next steps, because it's dark out. But if the boat can survive until it's actually light, he's got a pretty good chance of hopping on board. He's got a 10-gallon jug of water. He's got a bunch of cans of food. He knows exactly where they are, so he's coming up with a game plan to be able to hop on board and grab all that stuff. The only problem is, the whole time there's still breaking waves that are coming over, and essentially he's sitting there, and every time one of these breaking waves comes, it hits that life raft, and it's just stressing it, and it's like making these terrible noises. And the last thing you want to do is stress that inflatable ring, because if it pops, then you are really out of luck. And eventually, the line that he has tied off to the boat comes untied. And now he's floating away, and he sees his boat, and the boat is getting further and further in the distance. The lights are like flickering on and off, and then it sort of disappears. And therein lies one of my biggest nightmares. If I ever have to think about something that would be absolutely terrifying, that is just worst case scenario in my mind you could ever have on a boat, I believe truly that it's actually worse than going down with the ship, because now all of a sudden you are on this raft, and it's inflated. It has the ability to just pop at any moment, even though they're pretty sturdy. But it's the fact that you are now only above the water by a thin skin of rubber. That's what terrifies me, and we'll figure out why that scares me so much as we go through this story. But so he's got a pretty decent amount of stuff aboard this life raft, and it comes with its own little thing of, like 6 or 10 pints of water. In his emergency grab bag, he's got fishing stuff. He has a spear gun. He's got some food. He's got paper, pencils. He's got tons of flares, handheld flares, rocket flares. So he's pretty well equipped as far as if you were stuck in a life raft, you want to have all the stuff that he's got. The only thing he wishes he had more of would be water and more food. But it does come equipped with 3 solar stills. And these are basically these little inflatable jobs that you put in the water, and they let a little salt water in. It's got sort of a nice shield on top, and as it evaporates the salt water, it strains out the salt, and now you've got fresh water. So he's basically drifting. He's about 500, 600, 700 miles off the coast of Africa. The way the oceans and the winds work in that area is everything is moving back towards the Caribbean. So he's pretty well versed in disaster stories, survival stories, sailing stories, and he has a pretty good head on his shoulders when it comes to, what's going to happen here. If he figures out how fast he's going, and he figures, well, okay, if I got to drift all the way to the Caribbean, then it's probably going to take me multiple months. But I'm probably going to get picked up because I have all these flares. When ships go by, all I have to do is make it to the shipping lanes. He's also got an EPIRB, which is an emergency position indicating radio beacon. So it's an old school one where you fire it off if you see a plane, because the planes pick up that distress signal. They can report it, and then the Coast Guard and whatever can send any vessels in the area to rescue you. But you have to be able to see an airplane. Aboard Sparrow nowadays, we've got more advanced EPIRBs that actually just go straight to the satellite, right to the Coast Guard, gives you my position, my distress signal, and then they know I'm in trouble no matter where I am. If you're in the Southern Ocean, you can blast your EPIRB off all day. It's going to be probably a week to 10 days at the earliest that somebody's going to come get you. But this is the North Atlantic, and there's a lot of shipping, and chances are it's going to get picked up. Again, this is 40 years ago, so things were a little bit different, but still, the odds are that you're going to get picked up. Days turn into weeks, turn into a month, and still no pickup. He's sighted multiple ships. He's fired plenty of flares, day and at night. Still, ships just pass right by him, and it's sort of one of those things where he realizes that ships aren't really going to just spot him, because even he has trouble spotting the ships. Some of these things are like 800 feet long and 100 feet high, and he doesn't even see them until they're real close. So how's his little orange life raft going to be spotted by, somebody who's up on the bridge probably reading a magazine or something like that, glancing every once in a while out there? So he's in a pretty bad position as far as actually getting rescued just by chance somebody comes and sees him. But the real problem and the real terror when I think about it and when I read his book is essentially it takes only about a week before the fish that start schooling underneath his little raft, because out on the ocean, if you are an object that's just floating around, you start to attract the little things, little barnacles, little tiny fish, planktons, all that sort of stuff sort of collects around you because you're this like shady, weird thing that's in the ocean that's pretty much empty everywhere. And then the bigger fish come to feed on the little fish. And then the bigger fish come to feed on the big fish. And then the sharks come, and you get my point. So underneath his boat are mostly smaller fish, triggerfish and dorado, which sometimes can get big, but they actually start sort of, it feels like they're punching from the bottom of his life raft. So you have to imagine you're sitting in this raft at night. You can't see anything. The ocean's out there. You don't know if the inflatable's going to keep hanging on. You've got all these doubts in your mind. You don't have a ton of water. You don't have a ton of food. And all of a sudden, underneath this raft, thump, 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 thump. And I literally would go insane. I don't think I could handle it mentally. I think I would become so paranoid and terrified. My hat's off to Steven because he just guts it up. Cut to 2 weeks on the raft is when the first of the sharks show up. So now he's contending with actual eating machines that could easily destroy his life raft with just one bite. All they have to do is come up, bonk, pop it, and now he's in the water and he is getting eaten alive by these sharks. So you can see why this would be pretty much my biggest nightmare. If I ever went down out there, the thought of being in a life raft and slowly getting picked apart is absolutely wow. I'm just imagining it right now, and it's terrifying. Like I don't even know if I'm ever going to go sailing again. Just kidding. So weeks again, like I said, turn into over a month. He's out there, and the solar stills, as he runs out of water, the solar stills aren't working all that great. Now, he has 3 of them. The first one doesn't work. He opens up the second one. It produces a little, but he ends up drinking it, and it's salt water. And then he's sort of like, well, I don't want to really open the last one. I'm going to sacrifice this first one and figure out how it works so that I can then fix or make better the other two that I have. And he was really lucky because he was smart enough and mechanical enough and sort of with it still. So he was able to do that, and he got these other two solar stills working. Because out there, sometimes it just will go weeks without rain. And the most frustrating part is that you can have rain squalls a mile away from you and just pass right by and dump thousands of gallons of rain. I saw it in the doldrums in the Indian Ocean when I broke my water pump and then had to survive just off of rainwater for the next 200 days. I basically saw so many squalls, and I tried to chase them down with the boat, but no avail. And it's one of the most heartbreaking things to be thirsty and have to ration your water and see a big, huge rainstorm pass right next to you without a single drop hitting your boat. Absolutely heart-wrenching. But he stays with it, and he keeps going. He starts using the spear gun for fishing. The life raft is holding up pretty good, but you can imagine it's pretty miserable in there. It moves up and down, bobs up and down with the wind and waves. It's not very comfortable to lay down in. It's usually pretty wet. When he lays down, his head is up against the wall, and when a wave hits, the rubber closes around his hair and pulls his hair out, so it's really hard to sleep. There's all these little things that happen that are just sound so annoying. Meanwhile, either sharks or fish or whatever is bumping him in the night from the raft. But he is able to catch a few of these fish. He spears them. And after he's done this quite a bit, he's got like a butcher shop where he's got all this hanging fish meat. And he's sort of trying to create his own little world out there. He's doing yoga. He's trying to have some semblance of a routine, which when you are down and out and things are really, really tough, a routine can be one of the most grounding things that you can do. You get that going, and no matter how tough things are, you know, okay, I still have to do this, and this, and that helps you break up your day. Because, I mean, he's just sitting in a life raft all day, and then night comes, and he's got these terrors of these fish or these sharks trying to bump at him. The stress levels are just off the charts here, off the charts. Meanwhile, as time goes on, he starts to lose more and more weight. You know, you got to imagine he's getting boils from the sun. He's always laying down, so he's getting like just rashes, and he's wet and he's salty, and all those things that you usually do when you clean yourself aren't happening, so it's getting super gross. Plus, the life raft is starting to get wear and tear, and on one occasion, he's spearfishing, and he gets a big Dorado, and boom, hits it, and this thing whirls around, and boom, psh, it pops one of the tubes. Now, this life raft has two main tubes that are in kind of an octagon, one on top of the other, and it popped the bottom one. So now, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, well, we're sinking again. Holy cow, I can't believe this is happening again. And he's able to, with pretty ingenious thinking and drive, he's able to use a whole bunch of stuff to be able to mend it just enough so that it'll be airtight while he's in the water. And he's able to, by pumping it up regularly, keep the life raft afloat. Now, more and more fish are coming, and day out, it's just drifting and drifting. And he devises his own little sextant so he can sort of figure out where he is. And 1 month turns into 2 months. So he's out there 60 days. Every once in a while, he still sees a ship, and he still has flares, and he fires them, and nothing happens. And then around the 70th day or so, there's the life raft is disintegrating to the point where there's like openings all over it. And these fish that have been with him in this school for almost the whole time are now, and this may be part hallucination, part storytelling, I'm not really sure, but eventually these fish become so used to his presence, even though he's taking them out every once in a while and eating them, he was able to like pet these things. And eventually he's able to reach down, grab them, and pull them in as if they're offering themselves to him. It's a wild part of the book, and I highly recommend checking it out. In any event, on the 75th day, that night, he spots a small glow on the horizon. And at first he thinks, oh man, it's a ship. It's got to be a ship. Holy cow. Okay, get the last. He's got like one flare left. Get my last flare. Here we go. And then he realizes that's not moving. holy cow, could that is land. And he sees land off in the distance, just the glow of the lights at first. And the next day, as he's getting closer and closer to land, he can actually see it. And it's unbelievable, but he's still just floating out there. And chances are the currents are going to wrap in between the islands of the Caribbean and could just spit him right out. And this guy's like on his last leg, literally on his last leg. And one of the things that happens out at sea, whenever there's schooling fish, you're also bound to find birds in the sky. And when I was living in the Caribbean, working at the Bitter End Yacht Club, loving life, we used to do these fishing trips, and all the locals used to say, all we do is we go out and we look for the birds. Where we see the birds, we know the fish are, and that's where we go. So he's out there, and he's probably 10 miles or so offshore, off of the island of Guadeloupe, about midway down the Caribbean, and he ends up, he's got this all the seabirds are there, they see all these fish, and they're like, what? So they're all hanging out right above him. A few miles away, unbeknownst to him, there's a bunch of fishing boats, and these are just local fishermen. They're in these like 20-foot little power boats, and so they see these birds, and they're like, woo, here we go. Motor over there, and what do they find? Completely sun-blistered, burnt-up life raft. Doesn't even resemble the orange rescue colors it used to have. This withered little man, long, scraggly hair, bleached out from the sun. The imagining it, I could only say Tom Hanks at the end of Castaway, but really that doesn't do it any justice to what this guy must have looked like. And these locals are like, what? They grab him, they put him in the boat, and Steven actually was like, hey, don't wreck your fishing day, guys. We can stay out here and fish. We don't be in a hurry. And they're looking at him like, dude, I don't know if you can see yourself, but we got to get you to a hospital like stat. And so they end up taking him in, and long story short, he survives this ordeal. At total, he was out for 76 days, which I think is like the third most days recorded in a life raft ever. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And to imagine that is, it's just, like I said, it's the scariest thing, because I get a little spooked when like whales or even a huge pot of dolphins are around, because I'll be down in my bunk sometimes and I can hear them squeaking or the whales calling, and it's sort of like, whoa, huh, all right, we got animals around. But Old Sparrow is pretty stout, and I feel pretty safe. I mean, I've had 40-foot whales swimming right next to me. Didn't feel so safe then, but made it through. I know Sparrow could put up a fight. Essentially a pool raft is underneath you. You are so vulnerable to all of these animals that essentially swim around in the ocean looking for food. I couldn't even imagine it. My hat's off to Seven Callahan. His book, Adrift, is absolutely amazing. He tells it very well, and he's a great writer. Super adventurous guy, and he actually ended up getting back to the States, and he started working on making better life rafts. So good on him. He gave great potential, or he's probably saved many a life ever since then, just from the lessons he learned while he was out at sea. So really, really cool story. Again, the book is Adrift, and you definitely want to check it out. So that's a sailing story for today. I'm Jerome Rand. Thanks for watching, and more stories to come.